Welcome to the Upland Nation podcast. Scott Linden here. Glad you could join me. Interesting show in store for you. We've given her plenty of time to get settled in. She knows where the coffee machine is. Marilyn Vetter, the relatively new CEO of Pheasants Forever and Quail Forever, will tell us what's up, bring us kind of up to speed on what she's been doing since she took over from our good friend Howard Vincent. And we're going to make it a very wide-ranging discussion from hunting and hunting dogs, some of her passions, to the state of pheasants and quail today. All the activities that are going on within and without their organization that might be helping pheasants and quail and, well, who knows what else. That'll be the bulk of the discussion today, but a couple things from you, and looking forward to them. I asked on social media, what's the most unusual thing you've found on a hunt? You might be surprised and amused at some of the answers. We'll cover that as well. And then in our Handle It segment, lots of interest in, kind of short-term, last-minute desperation moves when it comes to helping your dog retrieve. You know what I mean. When they're all watching and you got to get the bird back. I've got some born of desperation suggestions myself for you on that one. So if you're working on retrieving, this ain't a force fetch lesson. It's the helpful hint or hack that might save a bird from, destruction, if you know what I mean. And it's all made possible by Sage and Breaker, Pointer Shotguns, Mid-Valley Clays and Shooting School, Trulock Choke Tubes, MidwayUSA.com, Purina Pro Plan Sport Dog Food, LandTrust.com, ESPAmerica.com, and High-Vis Shooting Systems. Well, it's been really hot and really smoky out here. And I've been on the road. I got some fishing pictures I might share with you down the road. But right now, what have Flick and I been up to? Well, there is so much cheatgrass this year that every time I run him out behind the place, he comes back covered in the stuff. And we spend 10 minutes pulling it out of every hole and every hair that the poor guy has. It's no fun for either of us. So we're doing less running and more roading. Lucky enough to have a cool little Ubco electric motorcycle from New Zealand that is perfect for that. He's on a harness and he's on a rig that keeps him safe. And we're doing a lot more of that a lot earlier in the day. I'm interested in learning more about that whole roading thing. I'll be reporting on that as we get down the road a little bit. But that's what we're doing, early morning stuff for us, maybe for a lot of you as well. It's been quite a summer, hasn't it? Yeah. But that still doesn't stop us from remembering all the interesting things that we found over the years. In fact, I was fishing with my good buddy Dave, talking about some of the things we found on trips we've been on together. Lots of arrowheads. A big spear point for me, a really old, pre-Clovis, if you know what we mean there, pre-Clovis arrowhead, on one of our last trips last season, which was really cool. Pictographs, of course, Stone Boys, those are the cairns up in Basque Country in that Great Basin area. Cow with a dead cow with a pack rat nest in its body cavity, and a bandit hideout. Yeah, lots of bandits in the country that we hunt. And this one was basically a cave that had been remodeled. Let's leave it at that. Now, I'm not saying it was his, but it was the country where Claude Dallas hid out the first time. Pretty cool stuff. But you have some as well. Dave DeSmither, I don't want to know more about the body you found. Lance Larson, a big-horned lizard that let you pick them up. Remember when we were kids, we thought they were going to squirt blood out of their eyes at us. Jeff Secor, remains of a 150-year-old Finnish homestead. Oh, and you shot a grouse. Okay, I don't know which is more exciting. Grant Goblish found his way back to the truck. Yeah. James McConnell, an old fiberglass boat on the ground. No trailer. In the middle of lower Michigan. Yeah, I remember one of those. I was outside of Aberdeen hunting, and we're in just this big kind of broken country, and we come over one little rise, and there in a low spot is an old boat. Well, the way it was raining that day, it probably floated back to wherever it belonged. Scott Vetter, military 50 cal Army ammo from the Patton Training Center in the California desert. Hey, I'm going to be down in that country this year, Scott. So if you want to talk, I'd love to listen. Yeah, and a camera, all in the California desert. I know, don't you love desert hikes, especially if you're carrying a shotgun and following a dog? Richard Allen, don't ask me why or how because I don't know and I don't want to know, but I have found adult novelties. Let's just call them that. We all know what you mean. Yeah, not me. No, I haven't found any. No, and I haven't left any. And then Scott Biziger, that is one of the coolest pictographs I've seen in a while. It is, of course, those are the ones that are scratched onto rock surfaces. And this one was, we used to think it was post European discovery, if you want to call it that, because it's somebody on what is clearly a horse. But now there's talk about horses having actually been in North America before the conquistadors and everybody else started bringing them over to dominate the local native populations. Anyway, pretty cool. Of course, we're not going to know where that is, and that's the right way to do it. With pictographs and petroglyphs, earn them just like you earn your great hunting spots. Great stuff, beautiful, interesting, all sorts of neat things out there. Aren't there? Yes, there are. Yeah, the Upland Nation podcast is brought to you in part by Mid-Valley Clays and Shooting School. These guys hunt. These gals hunt, Dave and Vandy, but everybody else there as well. So they know what works on the range and in the field, and they stock both types of guns, and in fact, many guns that will do double duty. Mid-Valley Clays is also sub-gauge central, always in stock, 20s, 28s, 410s. Learn more at midvalleyclays.com. Talk with Dave Fiedler. He knows guns, and he's your first stop when it comes to shopping for a new shotgun. Then when you're ready to buy, of course, he can ship anywhere. He can special order. He's got a line on some of those hard-to-find guns. Learn more at midvalleyclays.com. And I am becoming a believer in high-quality choke tubes for a lot of reasons. Well, anything that'll help me shoot better, yes, I'm all for it. And trulockchokes.com is where you can learn more about what I'm going to tell you right now. Their choke tubes are precision made with very tight tolerances. In fact, I had a discussion last week with somebody, my former veterinarian. We were shooting sporting clays, and he was tightening his chokes at every station. And I said, hey, you might look into, some aftermarket chokes from trulockchokes.com. One of the things that they do is really carefully engineer and manufacture their choke tubes so the tight tolerances will allow you to cinch those tubes in and they'll stay in. Made in the USA with US produced steel. Learn more about the technology and the engineering at trulockchokes.com. And once you've exhausted your choke tube budget, spend the rest of your money at midwayusa.com. Save a little bit of it. Sign up for their emails or text, and you'll get 10% off your next order. They have just about everything for shooting, hunting, and the outdoors, including a lot of camping stuff that I used last week, fishing on, I can't tell you where, down there in northeast California. Used a lot of their camping gear down there, and of course it performed to expectation. They've always got a sale, a special, or a contest, and don't forget, I have a whole bunch of exclusive videos on helpful hints and tips for dog training. It's all at midwayusa.com. Well, I'm eager to talk with her. We've kind of stayed apart while she got settled in over there at Pheasants Forever and Quail Forever. Marilyn Vetter has a long and illustrious history in serving you and me on boards, including Pheasants Forever, Quail Forever, and NAVDA. Also led the NAVDA organization, and just about, 12, 14, 16 months ago, took over as the CEO at Pheasants Forever. Marilyn Vetter, welcome to the Upland Nation podcast.
Well, thank you, Scott, and it's great to talk to you again. It's been a little bit since we had a chance to catch up, so I'm looking forward to it.
Same here. In a lot of ways, it's good that we're talking now. You've got a little bit of mileage on your odometer at Pheasants Forever as the CEO, and so maybe some things have gelled. Maybe some things have kind of come together in your own mind about strategy and that sort of thing. We'll talk about all of that, the state of pheasants and quail and conservation and habitat. But first, as I was doing research for our interview, I realized that you and I are siblings from other mothers. You started in journalism and went into what I'll loosely call government relations. I did it bass-ackwards. I became a political media manipulator, and then I started a newspaper. So you did it the right way, and I bet you learned a lot there, and it's probably coming in handy right now, isn't it?
It is. It's funny how things come full circle, isn't it? My roots are in journalism and communications, and it's been fascinating to see how the skills that I learned in that process have been helpful throughout my entire life.
Oh, no doubt about it. In fact, what you did before you came on as CEO at Pheasants Forever probably hasn't changed much. You're probably still doing a lot of the same things, aren't you?
Well, it's funny. I just got done proofreading an op-ed, so that has to do with Farm Bill. So yes, things definitely have not changed too much when we think about conservation. Conservation is deeply steeped in federal and state regulatory and other policy, including appropriations. So it was a very good learning ground for me in this role.
Well, we'll dig into that more, but first let's get to the really important stuff. What kind of dogs you're running these days?
Well, that has been a constant throughout at least my upland lifetime that my husband and I, Clyde and I, have always had German short-haired players. And
I should just editorialize for a moment. Incredible lines and incredible performance. You and Clyde together, who I'm looking forward to talking with in a few weeks, are incredible trainers with lots of invitational champions in there, and congratulations on all of that. What would you say is, sure, in a nutshell, what is your training philosophy that allows those dogs to reach their fullest potential?
I think the most important thing that sometimes people miss when they get invested in organized testing and trialing systems is that those systems were designed to evaluate talent and potential to be hunting dogs, to be exceptional hunting dogs. And so while Clyde and I are very invested in the North American Versatile Hunting Dog Association and absolute true believers in it because they do create foot hunting dogs, we never forget that the most important thing about our training techniques and philosophy is that what we are trying to create is an exceptional hunting dog that can also be evaluated in testing systems.
I get it. And if I can tell you how I get it, you can probably correct me. But what I love about NAVDA is if you can pass a NAVDA test, you have created in that dog most of the skills and abilities that will create a good hunting dog. Is that what you're getting at?
Exactly. That's what the system was created for, was to evaluate whether a dog could have all of the instincts and abilities to learn and work as a team player to do two things. One, most importantly, is to be a good hunting dog. And then the second would be that for some, not all people, whether or not that dog is actually potential stock for a breeding program.
Right.
And so that is why we have always thought that it's important as breeders to have non-biased assessments of the litters that have been produced. And we've always asked people to do as much as they can in the system, what works for them. But by doing that, puppies that I may never get to see again because they go to Washington or Oregon or Florida or Texas or Arizona, they're being evaluated by someone that may not know me, that doesn't know anything about these puppies' lineage, and they are getting an unbiased assessment that then helps inform us whether or not that pairing worked or not. And so that's really the dual prongs of the North American Bristol Hunting Dog Association testing system, and I think quite honestly most testing systems.
Sure.
Is can they create a great dog, but also is that dog additive to that breed's gene pool?
Yeah, in summation, a lot of people ask me, and I'm sure they ask you, I really want to have a puppy out of that dog or my dog or whatever. And the question to ask all those people is, will that improve the breed as a whole?
Correct.
Good.
What does the breed gain, and what does your particular breeding program gain from accessing the genes from that dog?
All right, so let's talk application instead of theory. Tell me about one of your last great hunts.
So this January, the last 2 years, we've been going to Arizona to try our hands at desert quail.
Yeah.
And it's a steep learning curve, but man, is it a fun one. And we had such a great time. And this year, we had the absolute honor to go visit Josiah Austin, who has built what I guess I can't think of a better word for it, an oasis for desert quail in Arizona, in eastern Arizona, I would call it. And we went over to go see the things that he's done on his land to increase habitat for those birds, both in the nesting and the wintering season, and then to see how that came to life on his ranch and how the birds thrived because of it. I don't know yes, it was wonderful to go hunting there because we got to see that, but to see how that changed the production of numbers. And it was one of those eureka moments of when a landowner invests in conservation, the birds will respond. And thankfully, particularly quail, they rebound very quickly if they have great water and weather and habitat conditions, and how profoundly different this little oasis was compared to the land around it. And so for me, it was really a full package of the hunt that was wrapped into this amazing conservation space, brought everything full circle.
Oh, I bet. Yeah, especially not that any of this is new to you because you've been involved in conservation for so long, but now in your current position to, like you said, see it all come together in one spot. That's got to be cool. What kind of quail were you after while you were there?
So he had a mix of both scaled and gambled.
Yeah.
And it was interesting how on a covey rise, you'd oftentimes see both birds. It was fun. It was a lot of fun. And because he walked with us, it was even more fun because in many ways I got to see his ranch through his eyes.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, good for you and glad it worked, and probably perfect for somebody who's basically still kind of the new kid on the block. I mean, if I recall, you're basically the third CEO in the 40-year history of Pheasants Forever.
I am. It's pretty incredible, isn't it? To think an organization has been this strong and healthy for that amount of time. is really a testament to the organization that was built and to the people that built it.
Yeah, and the people that built it at every level. I mean, I've been an attendee in one way, shape, or form at Pheasant Fest for 15 or 18 years, and what boggles my mind is the commitment at the volunteer grassroots level. What do you think gets people so excited about Pheasants Forever and now Quail Forever? I remember those days. We might travel down that rabbit hole later, but what motivates your members?
I think it's a little bit of what I just talked about. Is They get to see that immediate response. So whether or not they have their own property, which thankfully many of them do, and they get to work with our farm bill biologists and watch their own properties come to life. And it's so much fun to hear them talk about how they've worked with members of our team and how they've, year one, it looks like this. And by year three, after some burning and some herbicides, and they just have this amazing oasis for themselves. So I think that's part of it. I think part of it also is that for lots of folks like myself that are predominantly public land hunters, that they also get to see properties in their geographies that are open to not just them, but to everyone around them. And particularly when it becomes a global wildlife area and it becomes a permanent fixture, that they know that not just they will enjoy it, but their kids and their grandkids and generations to come. And it depends on the generation they're in and where they are in their lifetime. But for some people, that is that magic bullet for them, that they know that they have created a sweet spot or a honey hole, perhaps for a grandchild, that they'll still be enjoying perhaps when grandma or grandpa are gone. And that means a lot to people, more than people, I think, assume it will. It really is meaningful for a lot of people.
Are those people your older members or your younger members? Because I got my own thoughts and I won't share those, but I don't see a lot of downrange thinking in many of the younger folks these days. Argue me that.
So I would tell you that the majority of those folks are older, because I think as you get older, you think more about legacy. And what is it that I want to be left behind when I'm no longer here? And how do I have an impact in the future when I may not be able to do it? So I do think that's just naturally part of a human progression, that as the older you get, the more you want to hold on to a little bit of mortality, including how can I have a legacy when I'm not here to steer and guide that. So I do think that's a natural part of it. I also believe that that's true because the majority of certainly small to medium-sized farms in this country are owned by a generation that is not young. And they hold a lot of the keys to the future because of that. I will say that I think, and you and I have probably both experienced this as we go to public lands, there's a time frame where maybe people were not as invested in conservation, but I see a generation of young farmers that understand that there's a balance, and that if they can find a way to improve their own farming techniques that allows what some people would call soft or dirty edges, so that birds can have an acre or two here or there on the fringes of their fields, or that they can make sure that they keep a few of those cattails still standing so that pheasants have wintering cover. You do see a generation of farmers that are, because of maybe exposure in environmental sciences as they grew up, that are really starting to think about how can I incorporate conservation into my farming practices that are a little bit more holistic, particularly if they too are hunters.
Yeah, and you just hit on, I think, what is really one of the keys there is they got to have a perspective that is beyond just raising crops and livestock. That hunter aspect of their life probably does have a major effect, doesn't it?
It does. I also think sometimes that, let's talk about quail region for just a minute, and we talk about how amp grazing, rotational grazing, is starting to take hold in certain pockets of the country. And where, if I'm a rancher and let's say I have 1,000 acres, which would be massive in the southeast part of the country, but even if you have a couple hundred acres, and they have seen the benefits of intensive rotational grazing, where you're frequently moving your cattle after they have completely grazed down an area, and they move them to the next one, and they keep moving them, and they don't take them back to that first spot for quite a while. And that wasn't studied. And it probably didn't need to be, because we had more land at the time. But as land gets more and more encroached by urban development, by all kinds of needs, we are going to have to highly manage the lands that we do have. And when you talk to ranchers that start to implement amp grazing, and you're starting to see more of it in the Midwest as well, one of the things that we've heard from some of those ranchers in the Southeast, and this was not their intention, but when they implemented it, the quail came back. And you'll hear a rancher say, I haven't had a quail on my property in 20 years. And now I get up in the morning and I hear this whistle. And it makes a lot of them pretty misty-eyed, because even if they don't want to go out and hunt that covey, having a covey on their land takes them back to the heritage that they grew up with, when there were quail abounded everywhere in the southeast quail region, bobwhite quail. And part of that is there was a disconnection for a long time of what are the reactions of our actions. And now people are starting to take note. What do I do to my land that causes an impact, not just on production, but also on conservation and on just wildlife in general? And now that we have some data on some of those things, I think it's really important for us to share that messaging, because a lot of people just hadn't thought about it.
I get it. Yeah. I'm Scott Linden, the host. That's Marilyn Vetter. She's the CEO of Pheasants Forever and Quail Forever. This is the Upland Nation podcast. Just getting warmed up here. Marilyn, I look at the other side of that. I was fishing on a 50,000 acre cattle ranch 4 days ago. And it is managed in less than ideal conditions for wildlife, but it sure turns out to beef. How do we deal with those bigger operations, particularly when, when we're talking more about pheasants in the upper Midwest or anywhere else where they are the predominant game bird species? I remember for years, your predecessor and I would study the state of Irish whiskeys, and I made one request at every Pheasants Forever, and that was, how do we shame the ethanol companies into giving back that 2-acre edge around all those cornfields? Make them pay for conservation. What can we do in that world, and what are you working on in that world?
Boy, I hear your frustration, and I think a lot of people do. And quite honestly, I think a lot of those landowners feel that frustration too. So when we think about incentives that are created for landowners, oftentimes, you've heard the term perverse incentives. Perhaps some of the programs that we created did not necessarily drive behaviors that were sustainable, tenable, acceptable for people long term. So some of the things that we've advocated, in particularly in the Future Farm Bill, is that we hear this argument oftentimes that programs may sometimes make it unreachable for young farmers to get into farming. I would tell you that I don't know that it's programmed so much as just the cost of land is going up exponentially.
Yeah.
But there are pockets of land, and you and I have seen them. And quite honestly, if you're a bird hunter, what do you look for when you go bird hunting? You don't usually look for the most fertile ground in the world. You look for, quite honestly, the crappiest soil out there, because those are the kinds of pockets of weeds and shrubs and things that birds hang out in. And what we have done with some of our incentives is have not advantaged the poorest soils, the poorest portions of a field, so that if a farmer has a 200-acre field, but he's got swells in the middle of it that are cattails, or there's always going to be runoff there, and they would be better off letting that draw just not be seeded and always just be there. It has grassland in it, it has weeds that grow up in it to slow down that water movement so that it stays in their field and it doesn't cause big gully washers in their fields and dirt filling their ditches. And so is there a way in policy that we can give a higher rate, let's say CRP rate, for poorer soils than we do for rich soils that should be in crops? Those are the kinds of things that we need to turn the programs on their head a little bit. I think the other thing that was added over the last few years was grassland CRP, which has helped farmers find a way in an incentive program, ranchers to find a way in an incentive program that behooves them to be ranchers, keep that prairie green side up by having an incentive to keep their pasture standing as opposed to tilling it and putting it into row crops, when oftentimes, at least in the farm that I grew up in, we were a hilly, alkaline, sandy soil. It probably wouldn't have grown many weeds, much less a lot of row crops. And those are the prairies that we would want to stay standing. And that little bit, now grassland CRP is not going to make somebody wealthy, but it can be enough to keep a rancher saying, I'm going to stay in cattle, I'm going to stay in prairie, so that I don't have to feel forced to till it and put it into corn.
Yeah. In fact, it's funny, I had a discussion on a long drive coming back from that place about why particularly farmers do what they do, which is jump from crop to crop to crop, depending on what the prices are like, and hopefully betting on next year's prices for this year's crop. Is it really a matter of dollars and cents? For example, why can't we make the ethanol companies, and I'm just using them as the bad guys, and they're not bad guys, I know some of those guys, but why can't we make the ultimate beneficiary of that pay their fair share, for example, in a higher CRP-like program that just compensates ranchers and farmers with higher dollar amounts? Is that what you're talking about here?
Yeah, it really is. It's creating a CRP program that is not vastly different than what we have, but that it would have at least a portion of those dollars that would advantage poorer soils that would not necessarily be in such massive amounts. It's hard for farmers to give up several hundred acres.
Yeah.
But perhaps they could give up 5, 10, 15 acres, and quite honestly, that we know that's particularly for pheasants. They don't need 1,000 acres. I mean, 1,000 acres is great, but they don't need 1,000 acres. If they can have 40 acres, or you have a couple of 8 to 10 to 20 acre areas within a section where they can migrate back and forth, maybe they won't have as many birds as they had 1,000. But at least you'll have a sustaining population. We see the same thing in quail, and that when quail can migrate in small geographies that have connectivity through edges and things, that they can really flourish. And that's part of the things that science is teaching us, is that we don't need to only have vast tracts of land. Those are great if you can get them, but it's not an all or nothing mentality any longer. And how do we create this common ground as opposed to, I'll use your word, shaming ground, where we can get people to see that there's a way that we can feed the world and feed habitat and wildlife at the same time?
Yeah, it's simply a question of making it perhaps we should lower our expectations. It'll never pencil out, but it'll be closer to penciling out.
Correct. Right. And because you'll have not just, so when you think about Nebraska, if we could implement programs like that in eastern Nebraska, people in eastern Nebraska wouldn't have to drive all the way to western Nebraska just to, let's say they had an afternoon instead of a whole weekend. They could maybe drive a couple hours and get on a few birds, as opposed to saying, I need to truck to the southwest corner of Nebraska. And if you live in Omaha or Lincoln, that's not exactly a jaunt. And so that would allow them to have more frequent interactions with wildlife, as opposed to having to always make it a trip. Yeah. Now, we know that there's going to be some geographies that, we're not going to probably create meccas on the fringes of Chicago, but we can certainly do them in pockets of western and southern Illinois.
Sure, I get it. And we'll talk more about that on the meta level and then on the more local level in the second half of the podcast, as well as kind of your new strategic direction. We'll talk more about that at Pheasants Forever and Quail Forever. And I got a bunch of specific questions for you too, and maybe we'll even talk more dog training after that. But for a moment, you get a rest, I get to talk, and you will be back with us in a moment. That's Marilyn Vetter, the CEO of Pheasants Forever. I'm Scott Linden. A couple brief messages that help pay the bills around here. The first one, speaking of managing private land, landtrust.com is where you can get outdoors without the crowds. If you're looking for managers who have taken the effort and the expense to create great private habitat, just like an Airbnb or a VRBO, you can get on their place for a day or 10 days or whatever you want. Go online and shop around to find a place you like. Know you're going to be the only ones on it. You and your dog and a buddy or two. Hunting exclusive private land takes the stress out of planning your upland hunt, whether it's across the country or across the county. Learn more at landtrust.com. And ProPlan Sport is how you fuel your dog for an active, long hunting season. I'm a big believer. I have seen Flick and his performance and his confirmation. A lot of people don't realize if you can look at your dog. I had somebody say to me yesterday, man, that's a good looking dog. And they're right, of course. And I'm a little bit, biased, but he is a good looking wire hair. And part of it is because he's eating the right formula. In this case, ProPlan Sport. High protein formula, real meat as the first ingredient. Those amino acids in the meat nourish the muscles, including helping recover from hard exercise. 30% protein, 20% fat, fuels the metabolic needs of every dog, especially hunting dogs. Learn more at ProPlansport.com. And back to the Upland Nation podcast with the CEO of Pheasants Forever, Marilyn Vetter. Tell me more about your dog training experience. What I want to know is, I know we know you have a deep background in it, but what is something that we might not have thought of that could help our dogs become better hunters?
Start earlier and in ways that people don't think about that translates into hunting. Because what I see too often, and certainly not in my own puppy buyers, because I'm pretty adamant about staying connected to them, but small things like crate training and having alone time and traveling with them, having them eat in their dinner in their crates out of a bowl as opposed to free feeding in the house, so that they learn that they have to eat on the road, that they travel around not just to the vet, so that they think, great, every time I get in the truck, I'm going to get a shot between my shoulder blades, so that they understand that there is a connection. So many people struggle with travel with their dogs. And that's one thing that I think people really don't do well. But also just, particularly when pointers are different, obviously, than retrieving and flushing breeds. But, we want our puppies to have a certain amount of freedom so that they establish their field search and some independence as they grow up. But that doesn't mean that they're little bulls in a china shop and that they can be renegades. And that while I don't teach healing, so to speak, to a 3-month-old pointer, I will teach them leash manners. And Clyde, you are certainly going to talk about this at greater length.
Yeah.
But I believe that all dogs, whether they're hunting dogs or house dogs, and for me, ours are both, they should always be good citizens.
Yeah.
And that teaches a dog mental preparedness. They become tougher. Our puppies are not porcelain. Don't coddle them too much. That if they are afraid or of something, let them experience it. Let them encounter that. Don't intervene. Just like I guess you could say about parenting.
Yeah.
Let them experience things so that when they are in the field, they are not so fearful. We want our dogs to be fearless.
I'm reminded of a story I read a few days ago when it comes to human beings and how a certain generation out there is afraid to make a phone call. And I'd never thought about that. That is just like a dog that is unfamiliar with some other experience, whatever we want it to do. Different bird species, different kind of habitat, whatever it is. We need to put an electric collar on a certain generation and train them the right way. I won't quote you on that.
It's all about exposure, isn't it? Clyde had a client up this week that the dog is a really wonderful pheasant hunting dog. Lives in Iowa and he does a lot of it. He had never encountered a duck and he's 3 years old. And the owner was pretty frustrated that the dog was super sensitive. And we kept saying, this is going to require some patience because you didn't do it when the puppy was 3 and 4 months old. Now you have a 3-year-old dog that has a very defined perception of what a bird is. And it's not.
Yeah, his universe is a certain size.
Yes. And no matter what, let's say they weigh the same, they taste vastly different when you think about the oiliness of the feathers of a duck. All of us who are around training birds, ducks smell pretty different too. And so we have to realize that to them is like just because it has feathers doesn't mean it's familiar. And so the more you can expose a puppy to early on, the better off you are, the more well-rounded they are. And quite honestly, as a hunter, the more well-rounded you are. And so I encourage people, and I always tell people, like, it's so funny. The more somebody spends on a puppy, the more they think that they should protect and shelter them. And my advice to them is, if you have spent a lot of money on a puppy, it's because you've worked with a breeder who specifically breeds for sound temperament. That, I would tell you, Clyde and I will tell you all day long, yes, do I want a dog that has a great nose and great desire and instinct? But if they are mentally unstable, then they are of no benefit, certainly to the breed, and they most oftentimes are not benefits to that particular hunter. So you want a dog to grow its mental stability and toughness through experience.
Yes. I can't think of a better way to describe it. And you use the term exposure, and I think that's as good as any. If you go into any of the other, what I'll call dog disciplines, whether it's agility or Schutzhund or anything else, you find a whole crew advocating for a variation on, the dog should be exposed to 11 types of food and 11 types of floor and 11 types of bowls. And, they do these, they have these rigid rules about exposing their puppies to all these different things. People with beards and guys with hats. And you think about it, if you have to get formal about it and make it a list, that's one thing. But the idea is sound, isn't it?
It is. I don't know that it needs as much structure, but my point would be take your dog out, expose them in different types of cover.
Yeah.
Get them swimming early if you can. Now, if you get a puppy in Minnesota in February, that's pretty hard. But if you get a puppy in Minnesota in any time, May through actually early October, don't miss that opportunity to get them swimming early. I just saw a litter of last week of German short hairs. It's funny because people that don't know anything about short hairs will often say, oh, they swim. And there was a litter of puppies last week they were 6 weeks old, and they took them to a pond, and they're like a human infant. If you put them in water early, their natural instinct is to paddle. So it's letting them really rely on their instincts. And we oftentimes as human beings try to interfere because we're trying to make the world safe for them.
So here's my new bumper sticker. Paddle your pup. Don't coddle it.
There you go. There's that marketing mind coming out.
Yeah, so, boy, am I glad.
Now people are going to think you're spanking it.
I know, you're right. Yeah. Oh, no, we don't do that anymore, right? Oh, my.
Well, it kind of depends what you consider paddling, but I am never opposed to a tap on the rear end when they're chewing on something.
No, I agree. I whacked my guy over the nose with a sock. And I just touched his nose with the sock that he was trying to grab and chew just last night. Now, we could talk dogs forever, but you're here because of kind of your day job, which is running Pheasants Forever and Quail Forever. So let's get back on that track. You've been there, over a year. I think you were officially announced at Pheasant Fest 2 Pheasant Fests ago.
Correct.
Would that be Pheasants Fests? I'm not sure. Anyway, so in that time period, what has been the biggest challenge and what has been the biggest accomplishment personally for you?
I'd say the challenge has been to understand the scope of the differences in state and federal, particularly state programs, and learning all of the vast number of state programs and the federal programs, and then having to accept that I really don't need to know all those details.
Yeah.
Because that's why we have 375 wildlife biologists, because they're all experts in their states. But having at least a general concept of them, I think that has been hard to wrap your head around. I've no surprise to anybody that knows me. I'm a bit of an overachiever, and so it's been hard to admit that I don't need to know all of those things. But that isn't my job. My job isn't to tell a rancher or a farmer in Nebraska what kind of program he should access. My job is to make sure that there's someone on the team that can do that.
Yeah.
So I think that's been one of the things that I've learned and I've accepted. I would say the thing that I am the most excited about and proud of this team is the embracing of, and when I say the strategic plan, I don't want that to sound boring and mundane to people, because strategic plans are words on a paper. But when you think about the foundations of any organization, whether it's a corporation or it's a nonprofit like Pheasants Forever and Quail Forever, you have a couple of core things that drive the behavior of an organization. You have your mission statement, which for us is obviously to create habitat that creates abundance of wild quail and pheasants and the other wildlife that lives with them in those places. And you have a vision that says, and we will create more of those spaces with a broader audience of people so that more people can enjoy it. When you create a strategic plan, it's, all right, well, how are you going to get there? And it's a more definitive roadmap. And the organization obviously wouldn't have become 42 years old without a strategic plan. We've always had strategic plans, but we haven't shared those broadly. So a year ago, as a leadership team, and that's 14, 15 of us, VP and above, got together and said, is the strategic plan what our people on our teams would embrace? And so let's divide it up amongst the leaders in the organization. And then we engaged, I would say all told, about 60 people within the organization to work on those 4 strategic priorities to increase habitat, advocate for funding, to create access, and increase engagement in our upland community. And so we took the time so that our employees and our teams could be part of that process to develop a strategic plan that they too could embrace. And then we committed to the metrics that we will attain, which is also a difference for us. We have typically reported what we've done. And what we've said is we're going to hold ourselves accountable, and by God, we might have created some metrics that we can't attain, but that's okay too, because we will learn from the things that we don't do perfectly and do them better at the next go around. But then we took that strategic plan, we shared it put it in our journals. We shared it with our corporate partners and agencies ahead of time as well, some of them, so they could tell us if we were off our rocker or not, and if they could see how they would want to be aligned with it. Because we want our entire membership to feel like the strategic plan resonates with them too.
Yeah.
Because the 600 team members at Pheasants Forever and Quail Forever can't do this alone. And when you think about the first 22 years of this organization, we had secured about 3.5 million acres that was improved. Conservation habitat was improved and restored. And that was 100%, let's call it 98%, volunteer driven. We had very few team members.
Right.
And then just over 20 years ago, we started hiring farm-to biologists through programs with NRCS and state agencies. And then that really caused a snowball effect. Mm-hmm. And so now as an organization, we've impacted 26.5 million acres. But we don't want to forget our roots, where our volunteers participate in that process. And it's been really wonderful to see people read about it and say, I want to be part of that. And it gives them a way to say, well, maybe I don't want to participate in advocacy, but I really want to participate in working on access initiatives.
Sure.
Or expanding the upland community initiatives. And it allows them to see what our goals are and how they can participate in them.
Well, let's talk about those for a minute, because, at some point, what we want more birds flying. Yes, so that we can shoot at them, but also because that's kind of I'll call it our aesthetic. But so what are some of the major measurable objectives that you've spelled out in your strategic plan?
Well, and obviously we could share the exact numbers if you want, but we have certainly ratcheted up the number of acres, both on public and private lands, that in the next 3 years that we are going to exponentially impact. That they were actually kind of scary to put down in paper, but that's okay. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. We have really expanded in the last 2 years our efforts in the access space.
Yeah.
And that's an exciting spot, I think, for our members particularly.
Yeah.
So our biologists oftentimes are the folks that are maybe they're guiding where the pointy end of the shovel goes, and our volunteers get to help. And some people love that. Some people love running a drip torch, or they love running a cedar, or putting herbicide down, or chopping down conifer encroachment. But for other people, that's an intimidating process. But what they'd really rather work on is how do we raise funds to create access? And how do we work with state agencies to create access, particularly to public lands that perhaps are landlocked? And then for others that are saying, I'd really love to get engaged, but I don't see myself necessarily being out there with gloves and shovels,
Sure.
but I'd love to work on recruitment activities or helping bring new mentors, new hunters and conservationists. That's a really great way for people to get involved. And those numbers are incredibly important. If we don't address the fact that the average age of hunters and conservationists, not just hunters, is pretty darn high. When I think about our average age of our members is 60-ish, and the average age of our biology team is 32-ish, there's a big difference there. And we need to bridge that gap. And that will require a lot of different activities, both at the chapter level, but also we have some internal staff that are dedicated to getting conservation in students' minds much earlier. Can't wait till they get to college, because if they haven't been exposed to any kind of environmental science up to then, what would make them choose a career in wildlife biology or environmental science, other than perhaps to work for maybe, some organizations, but a lot of times people are going to wildlife biology, they perhaps want to work in a zoo because they haven't thought about how could I work on private and public lands out in, western South Dakota. So it's trying to get middle school and high school kids exposed much earlier. And then we have other programs that are involved really more at that elementary level. Milkweed in the Classroom is a great example of how you get little kids comfortable getting their fingers dirty and understanding how that creates butterflies and bees in an environment. And sometimes people ask me, like, well, why would you think about butterflies and bees? Because pollinators are where birds live too. And they love that kind of cover. And so there's this really great correlation between pollinators, which kids love to watch, and help them understand that there's a greater connection to the environment that they hadn't even thought about.
Love it. Of course, you talk about recruiting, whether it's a future biologist or just somebody who believes in what the rest of us are doing in conservation. But ultimately, so much of the funding that wildlife conservation employs is created by that Federal Aid and Wildlife Restoration Act, the Pittman-Robertson Act, which is, as most people know these days, at least I hope, funded entirely by excise taxes on shotguns and ammo and related hunting gear. There's a corollary in the fishing world, of course, but all that money is then doled out by the feds to the states to acquire land or improve habitat or manage it in one way or another. How do we recruit more hunters that will then go out and spend their hard-earned dollars on shotguns and shotgun ammo and all the stuff that actually pays for a good portion of that habitat management?
Well, there's probably not a magic bullet, and no pun intended there when we're talking about the Pittman Act. But I do think that every single one of us, and this is part of when I talk about the strategic plan, is that every one of us has a personal responsibility, whether it's for Pheasants Forever or Ducks Unlimited or the National Wild Turkey Federation or the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation or the Mule Deer Association, whatever your passion is. Every one of us has a responsibility, in my mind, to do two things: support the organization that you care about, but mentor someone. Because when I think about the way I grew up on a small little cattle ranch in central North Dakota. And even though my family, they were not bird hunters, they were deer hunters, I was around a hunting mentality my whole life. But most children today don't get exposed to that.
Yeah.
If we wait until they're adults,
Yep.
it's too late. And in fact, I was just reading a book in the last couple of weeks that talks about when political mindsets are established in young people. It's really between 14 and 18. Those years are the primary years where they establish a mindset around politics, social justice, environmental justice. And if they haven't been exposed to the connection and their own responsibility to connection of the environment, it is much, much, much harder to do later. And so, yes, it's wonderful if you want to take a colleague out that is your age and maybe hasn't been hunting in 30 years and you get them reconnected. That's fabulous. But it's far more important for us to take out young people and teenagers. And one thing that I'm super excited about is the young families that I see that are outdoor enthusiasts, that I use the word drag probably because it probably feels like this way to them. They drag their kids with them. And when I think about 30 years ago, most of the time what happened is that Dad went out with his buddies, and this is not a slight on anybody. This was just the way the culture worked. Mm-hmm. And the kids stayed home. And sometimes, thankfully, the kids started coming along when they were 10 or 12 or 14. But now, I think about, we have a board member, Dr. Susan Falaje, who works at the University of North Dakota. I'll shout out my alma mater.
Go.
And she's got two little kids. She's got a 6-year-old and a 1-year-old. And she and her husband don't go anywhere in the wild without them. Their kids go ice fishing with them. They go turkey hunting with them. And she's like, do I shoot less deer with my kids in my deer stand? Of course I do. But they will get better. And in the process, she is exposing them. And so now it's funny. Last year, her daughter was like, no, you can't shoot that one. He's not big enough. And she picked the one that she could shoot. And she felt like she got to be part of that by having some small role, whether it's helping clean the birds at the end of the day, whether it's just seeing them and identifying them. She takes her daughter with her when she goes out and does research on sharp-tail X, and her daughter watches through binoculars and looks for dancing. That child is going to have a vastly different outlook on the world because of that exposure.
No doubt about it. And anybody who was a teacher, especially in the public schools in the junior high age community, knows exactly what you're talking about. They adapt and adopt philosophies, styles. The whole Megillah is coming right in there. Their mind is open until it's slammed shut by factors that perhaps we hadn't even given thought to before. So I love that idea.
And Scott, it also does a little, you remember earlier we were talking about making puppies tougher?
Yeah.
I think exposing kids to disappointments, to failed hunts, to the deer that got away or the bird that got away, to long cold days in a duck blind or snow up to your hips when you're walking through cattails. It also does the same for them. It teaches resilience and how to deal with failure and understand that it is very easy to overemphasize failure when really, quite honestly, so it's a failed day. At the end of the day, it's still better than almost anything else you can be doing, and you can find the silver lining in it. And I think that is a critical life skill that it is difficult for children to experience in many other ways other than sports if we allow them to experience failure there.
I'm raising my hands and saying amen. Everybody should be on a losing Little League team once in a while. Don't ask.
I suppose that would be easy to have done.
But like you said, at the end of the game, you go home and you stew about it. At the end of a hunt or a fishing trip or even a hike, if you're just at that point, there's still something good that come out of it. And that is a great way to put it. By the way, that is, no wonder she's the CEO of Pheasants Forever and Quail Forever now. Marilyn Vetter, a great mindset. I'm Scott Linden. This is the Upland Nation podcast. Let's just hammer on a few things that I've been asked to ask you and that I've been wanting to ask you. We've just addressed the hunters and hunter number thing as thoroughly as I think we should. Quail numbers, pheasant numbers down in most cases, in most places. We've addressed the habitat. We've addressed funding. Are there any other major obstacles to those game birds? And granted, yes, there's a lot of other critters who benefit from a better situation for pheasants and quail. In fact, I'll tell you one funny story. You've been on a lot of airport shuttles leaving all sorts of events like Pheasants Forever. I don't know, this was 12 or so years ago, I bet. I get on one of those early morning shuttles. There's only one other person in there. I said, were you at the Pheasant Fest? Oh, yeah, I was. Really? What were you doing there? Oh, I'm with the Butterfly Coalition or whatever they were calling it back then. I'm thinking, did I just hear her right? It's 4:30 in the morning and she said butterflies and she's leaving the Pheasants Forever. I get it. So your organization's involvement with pollinators, other bird species, I'm afraid to guess what else. It's probably multi-tentacled by now. Those all have one purpose, don't they?
They do. So I suppose you could say that the one purpose is to create more birds, which is true, but that is as a result of better habitat.
Yeah.
And you are right, it is multi-purpose. When I think about, we spend a ton of time working in areas where prairie chickens live and where sharp-tailed grouse live. And quite honestly, sage grouse is a very big part of what our Western team works on. And the one thing that I encourage people to think about is that we can't be so myopic to think about what is it that helps me in my backyard. And one of the things that is probably going to challenge all of us a bit is we're trying to think about, with our agency partners and with other NGOs that work in the conservation space, of how do we impact larger geographies. And that doesn't mean we take 1,000 acres. It might mean, let's just call it a county in South Dakota or a county in Montana, eastern Montana, that we know that you could call it 20 wins, as opposed to focusing one win somewhere else. Where can we make large, vast differences more quickly and use the science to target them? And the reason I say not in our backyard is that sometimes people want us to, if they have $10,000, they're like, well, let's put $10,000 in this corner of Southwest Minnesota. Well, that might buy an acre, but that could go towards a project in Western Minnesota, maybe where you could partner it up with another agency. I'm not saying take it to another state, but you might have to partner with another chapter in their dollars, or 4 or 5 chapters might have to get together. And now they could build a wildlife area in one geography that actually makes a difference, as opposed to just trying to do tiny, tiny projects everywhere. And those are the things that we have to think. Like when I think about, we do lots of projects alongside Ducks Unlimited and our other NGOs, and that's the right thing to do. We should be partnering with them because, quite honestly, if you've hunted pheasants in the Midwest, you know that in the winter you're going to find them in catbill sloughs. And that's where we have common ground. We can work on the edges of those. And I think if we can use science to be more predictive of our success, which means we need to do a better job of measuring the outcomes of the work we've done. And should we replicate that, or are there some practices that quite honestly can be and should be abandoned because they aren't working?
Yeah. As we know, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different outcome. Not to say
I will say that there's some real learnings in quail country that I think are fairly recent about that quail don't, and maybe it's not so much recent. I think if you go back and you read Stoddard's writings from a very long time ago, he told you didn't have to burn 1,000 acres to make a difference, that you burn small geographies. It's trying to get people to understand that, yes, is it easier to just go wipe out 1,000 acres at a time? Well, sure, but then you've wiped out all of the bird populations in that geography. Where should we take the time, do smaller patch burning, creating a mosaic where birds can go back and forth, and then the next year you burn the acres you didn't burn this year, and you create a patchwork quilt, and they will move around. And so being able to radio collar birds, I think, will be very helpful for us to be able to watch them. There's a fascinating project that took place between our team, Tall Timbers, and I believe it was the Pennsylvania State Agency, and they worked on releasing quail in Pennsylvania. Now, it's too early to know if it's successful or not. This is in formerly native quail habitat, a property that our team worked really hard on with the state agency and others in the last few years to clean it up and create a very hospitable habitat for quail to possibly flourish. Tall Timbers brought in birds from geographies that were not so vastly different. So they didn't bring birds from eastern Texas. They brought birds from Kentucky and other places. And then we'll see, because they're collared, is it working? Are they surviving? And if they are, is it the birds from one state as opposed to another? Is it different geographies? We have to do a better job of measuring outcomes so that we aren't just doing random acts of conservation.
I'm overjoyed to hear that. One of my questions that I wanted to ask you was related, and that is, there has been, to a great degree, whether it's formal or informal, a real aversion to reintroducing stocking birds. When, at least on the pheasant side, and then if you come out my way on the chukar side, even the Hungarian partridge side, even the valley quail side in a lot of places, that's how they got here to begin with. And they seem to be doing okay. So whether it's pheasants or quail or anything like that, it sounds like there's a sea change, at least until the science is in, that says...
So in fact, it's on our website, or on our social media channels this week. There's a little bit of a nuance in the words you used.
Yeah.
Reintroduction and stalking.
Yeah.
So when we did the project in Pennsylvania, these were wild birds that were caught in their natural geography. Those birds tend to be much more successful in establishing themselves than a pen-raised bird that doesn't know what a red-tailed hawk is, and that they need to be on how to find their own food.
Exactly, and I love that, and I will do my best to remember that difference. But for years, that's one of the questions that I've always wondered about, and it all is about preparation, whether it's the population you're moving or the habitat itself. So can't wait to hear more about how that's going to work. Another one comes from another listener, and that is, I'm a member, I read the journal, I see all these projects on private ground that will never benefit me. I'll never be able to hunt on that guy's place. Why is Pheasants Forever and Quail Forever involved in private land work at all?
There's two reasons. Partly is that much of the funding that comes particularly from the federal government is for private land specifically.
Uh-huh.
And so those farm bill biologists that work exclusively on private lands are paid for to do that kind of work. It's to help those farmers, ranchers reestablish their own conservation mecca. And that's also, obviously, they've bought those acres. They're much more invested in them than just the incentives that they're getting.
Sure.
The second reason, quite honestly, for those of us who DIY it on public lands, is that we know that birds move. And birds need to have general geographies where they can move around. And yes, would it be wonderful if we had just, plentiful birds on just public lands? But we know that they need to have places to go back and forth, to feed, to winter, to nest. And so what we try to do is to have that word, when you think about a mosaic, what does that look like? It's a patchwork quilt of both public and private lands that work in concert so that birds do move around. And they are, if you have a whole county that's just private land, that's going to be tough, right? We are still creating birds, which is our mission, but we want to create birds in more accessible spaces. So that's the connection between the two strategic priorities, creating habitat that produces birds, and the second one, which is creating access.
Righto.
So when you look at a few years ago, Aberdeen, South Dakota worked with us and the local community and businesses there to establish the Aberdeen Pheasant Coalition because they really wanted Brown County to be the number one county in the state of South Dakota to attract pheasant hunters. And so what they did is they raised money along with our help and our team doing the same thing to incentivize private land owners to open those lands to public access. So those dollars that were raised in that access program were given to those landowners to open their private lands for access.
I love it.
So then last year we said, well, that was really successful. We went to South Dakota Game Fish and Parks. We went to South Dakota Tourism, and our fabulous partner at Onyx Hunton said, if we raise money, will you contribute money so we could create a pool of $250,000 to now provide incentives to more landowners to open up their lands, their private lands to access, to be accessible by public hunters. And we have a waiting list for us to raise more money to do that. So I feel your pain, I feel your frustration because I too rely on public lands. And so we know that is going to be the big push for the future. I think for fundraising is not just creating land, but creating accessible land.
You've just described what I'll call loosely capitalistic conservation.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
I'm all for it, by the way. So that I think is fascinating, and I'll watch that with.
We're super excited about it. Quite honestly, We're hoping that we can continue to grow that footprint of the PATH program far past the borders of South Dakota, and how can we scale that to other states?
Well, I'm not surprised Casey Wisemantle was probably a part of that whole thing. That's a great thing for all of you, and I've enjoyed the earliest benefits of that years back and hope to do it again soon. Casey, if you're listening, I'll take another invitation. Marilyn Vetter, CEO of Pheasants Forever and Quail Forever, if you could reach to the bottom right-hand drawer of your desk and pull out the magic wand that you were handed by Howard Vincent at the transition, while waving it, what is the one thing that you would want to happen?
Well, I need to wish carefully, don't I?
I'm not a genie in a bottle. You can wave it as long as you like.
If I had one wish, that all public land would have quality habitat. Quality is a big part of that. Right? We know we've all been to public lands that look like crap, that look like a softball field when we get there because they're grazed to a nub. or they're so full of weeds that they're impossible. So it's almost a little two-pronged, but all public land would be quality and accessible. If we had that, think about if we could unlock every acre of public land and make it quality, we would not be having conversations about how do we create enough spots for the interest that's coming through hunters, and so we could service it. And because we know that that's why some of the decline is people can't find enough land to be on.
Absolutely.
That would absolutely fix that problem.
Yeah. I work closely with the National Shooting Sports Foundation, and they've learned over the years, and one of the reasons they still work with me on various projects is we need to help people find places to hunt. We've got to create those places, and then we've got to show them how to find those places.
Yeah, we do.
And if they're crappy, well, they're not going to come back. So
no, they won't.
Well, last and most practical, before I turn you loose, an avid bird hunter, avid dog trainer, what's in your bird vest that may not be in our bird vest that we should put in there?
As does Clyde, a big stash of Benadryl.
Yeah.
So then if, God forbid, a dog gets bit by a snake, we slam 3-4 of them down their throat. And even though they are vaccinated, those two things can buy me enough time to get to a clinic.
Yeah. And just to be clear, you're taking the little, I think they're called capsules, and you're just you're throwing them down, like you said, throwing them down their throat, getting them to swallow those.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Going to be a big issue this year.
And there's all kinds of things like Clyde always carries. This is a great question to ask Clyde because his vest weighs a ton. And in fact, you might want to ask him, like, okay, get your vest out, lay it in front of me, and walk me through what you have in it, because he has pliers for snares, and he has a ton of stuff. I always carry honey in case my dog has, goes into shock, something like that. I always have that kind of stuff too.
Yeah, it wasn't too long ago that I learned that dogs actually get low blood sugar. I never believed that before, but
some dogs do, and it's pretty darn rare. But if it's super hot and they have not consumed enough water and they get their electrolytes out of whack, it's really important.
Yeah, and especially with dogs that are out of shape.
Yes.
Well, we could go on and on.
And good quality dog food, which you talked about earlier. And I couldn't agree more.
Well, we could go on and on and on, and we'll do this again, make it a kind of a regular thing, because I've learned so much, and I hope everybody else has too. Marilyn Vetter is the Chief Executive Officer at Pheasants Forever and Quail Forever. We never got around to the QF origin story, but we will someday. Avid hunter, dog trainer, dog lover. Marilyn, it's been a pleasure. I'm kind of glad we waited this long because we covered a lot of ground and a lot of things are very encouraging. So thank you for being a part of the Upland Nation podcast, and have a great day.
Absolutely. You're welcome, and I appreciate the invitation. And Scott, I also want to thank you for everything you do for the Upland community. You have created that community, and you are an important voice in it.
I'm flattered. Thank you very much, Marilyn, and goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Well, after that, I probably ought to just sit still and bask in the glory. I'm like I said, flattered and glad to hear that. And you all know that you're part of that, and it wouldn't be, it wouldn't be what it is without you all supporting us all, whether it's habitat and conservation or just getting the word out or helping you become better at that. Speaking of which, that'll be coming up soon in our Handle It segment. I'll give you a few hacks and hints, last-ditch efforts if you need a bird back and your dog just isn't cooperating. That'll be part of the Upland Nation podcast in just a moment. First, a word from highvissites.com. Man, I know I've been keeping you posted on how my shooting is going. And while I've been casting more than shooting the last couple weeks, I am still a big believer. These light pipes that interlock, you can interchange different colors. You can take off the entire sight on your shotgun real easily. They have really changed my shooting completely. Now, one other thing I do, and a buzz faucet, thank you very much for reminding me of this many years ago. I'm shooting through yellow shooting glass lenses. Seem to help me a little bit as well. But anyway, first off, I can see those light pipes better. And second off, my vision on moving targets is slightly more clear. That's my thought, at least. Watch some of those videos I'm putting together on shooting, especially at highvissights.com. Talk about that whole idea. You can do it too. You never lose the bead while you're on the target, and that's how you connect the two, the muzzle of the gun and the moving target. Yeah, explore all your options at highvissights.com. And carry your shotguns and your handguns and your rifles as well in a Sage and Breaker case. Clean it with Sage and Breaker products. Yeah, they make high-quality gun cleaning products and accessories for hunters and gun enthusiasts, always crafted at the highest caliber. Lifetime warranty. Learn more about them. Sign up for their mailing list so you get first word on some of the new products and the very rare sales. It's all at sageandbreaker.com. Well, this week on Handle It, kind of summing up, putting the capper on our discussions recently about helping dogs become better retrievers. And I got to tell you, that's all well and good, and everybody should work on that in their own way, whether it's force breaking a dog, conditioned retrieve, or just a fun retrieve that seems to work for you. But at some point, it ain't going to happen, is it? You just got to get the job done, and there are external or internal forces that are causing your dog not to deliver that bird to you. No jokes about hunting buddies. All right, so if you got to put the bird in the bag before it gets eaten, buried, or carried off by your dog, try some of these just in case. Young dogs in particular, but I think every dog I've ever met loves to chase. I don't care if they got a bird in their mouth or not. So if you got a dog with a bird in his mouth and he is just not working towards you, slowly or otherwise, run away. See what happens. And as you're running, keep an eye on that dog. When he gets caught up to you and wants to catch you, is it time to turn around and grab that bird. It works. Sometimes. Another one that I use a lot, and you'll have to work on this. I use it when I'm training dogs, and you other hardcore trainers may disagree, but I carry some really high-value food treats. Yeah, I know a bird in the mouth is probably the ultimate reward for a dog doing his job, whether he did it right or wrong. But sometimes a little bit of ham fat or chicken skin, cooked, will be worth the barter effort there. If that dog knows you've got something like that, he may just come right back and open his mouth to take the treat while you grab the bird. Try it. And then Algadori, thank you. I learned something every time I hunt with you. Young dogs in particular are enamored by flying objects. So if your dog is trotting around playing keep away with you, take your hat off and throw it. Hopefully your dog will drop the bird and run for that hat. Or if nothing else, run for the hat, drop the bird, then grab the hat. Put the bird in your vest, and then start over again and hope he doesn't take your hat apart. Well, just a few things that have worked for me over the years. Desperation moves, whatever you want to call them. Last-ditch efforts, halfway hints and hacks to get your dog to retrieve when nothing else works and you got to get the job done. And the Handle It segment this week brought to you by pointershotguns.com. Yeah, 66 days to the pheasant opener in North Dakota. If you haven't already marked your calendar, I frankly am surprised. October 12th. And if you're still shopping for a new shotgun, remember, Pointer Shotguns has the best over and under for under $500. That's the Pointer Acreus, according to Target Focused Life. Of course, there's a vast array of configurations, finishes, gauges. Take a look at the whole kit and caboodle at pointershotguns.com. Find a dealer, make the call, get your new shotgun broken in and dialed down at pointershotguns.com. Marilyn Vetter, can't thank you enough, number one, for taking on the challenge and picking up the torch from Howard Vincent at Pheasants Forever and Quail Forever. Keep up the good work. Very excited about some of those new programs. If you all want to learn more about that organization, you know how. Pheasantsforever.org, quailforever.org. Thank you all. I asked on social media for you all to leave a rating or a review, and I appreciate that. You know, I just learned that that's really how you grow. People only go to the podcasts that have high ratings and laudatory reviews. No comments about my looks, please. And I thank our sponsors as well who make this all possible. Sage and Breaker, Purina Pro Plan Sport, ESP America, Mid-Valley Clays, Trulock Chokes, Midway USA, Landtrust.com, Pointer Shotguns, and High Viz Shooting Systems. Some new stuff up at findbirdhuntingspots.com. Lots of interest there. And don't forget, there's a great webinar for finding public access. If you're getting warmed up for that sort of thing, you might pick up a tip or two there as well. That's the goal of everything I do. I hope it's working. I know that I'm a little bit long-winded at times, but I hope that you appreciate the help that we're providing as a result of that. Thank you in particular for being a good, loyal listener. Please tell your friends. I'm Scott Linden. Until I see you next week on the Upland Nation podcast, I'll see you at the training field.